Welcome to the deep dive. So today we're tackling something, well, really fundamental. It's about where that core feeling comes from, worthlessness, shame, guilt, that really deep sense of, am I okay? Am I lovable? Or is there something just fundamentally flawed about me?
Yeah, it's like the ultimate origin story, isn't it? And for this deep dive, we're really digging into the work of Juha Klaavu. He's a Jungian psychoanalyst, and he looks right at that very early relational stuff, trauma, really, how it sort of solidifies this core view we have of ourselves right from the get-go.
Right. So our mission today is to kind of unpack that, how those first-year experiences, before we even have memories, right, how they lay down this blueprint that, well, still runs the show in many ways.
It really does. And Klaavu gives us this model, like, picture the psyche as a sphere.
Yeah.
Right at the very center, that's your core experience of self, that initial feeling, am I okay or am I defective? And then everything else, all our defenses, our personalities, they're just layers built around that core, trying to reinforce it or maybe compensate. But that center, it pulls everything towards it.
Okay, the core experience. Let's zoom in on that.
Yeah.
You mentioned the timing, first year of life. Why then? Klaavu says it's because the baby's mind and body haven't separated yet.
Exactly. It's what we call the body mind. It's this fused state. There's no separate me thinking about things. So experiences aren't neat categories. They're these massive, all-encompassing states of totality. Like an adult might feel anxious about one specific thing, but for the baby, if a need isn't met, it's not just frustration. It's existential terror. The whole self feels like it's falling apart.
Wow, okay. States of totality. That sounds overwhelming. So what tips the scale? What makes it a state of, say, bliss versus total devastation?
It really comes down to the quality of the care. And Klaavu breaks it down. First, there's the obvious layer, physical stuff. Feeding, changing diapers, keeping them warm, easy enough to see. But then there's the second layer, emotional care. And that's trickier.
That's where the real nuance is, I guess.
Yeah. Absolutely. Emotional care isn't just about being physically present. It's about the mother's emotional presence, really being there, moment to moment, making the baby feel truly seen and met. And here's the crucial point. If the mother's just, going through the motions, like breastfeeding while scrolling on her phone or totally stressed about work, the baby gets the milk, sure, physical need met. But emotionally, it's abandonment. Total emotional abandonment.
Okay. So it's a difference between just the mechanics of care and the actual feeling of connection.
Precisely. And the outcome is huge. It defines our whole world. When needs are met properly, physically and emotionally, the baby's in this total state of bliss.
And you mentioned that this memory, or maybe the longing for it, shows up culturally.
Yeah, Klaavu points to things like that Finnish song Satuma,
Yeah.
Fairy Tale Land. He suggests it's not just nostalgia. It taps into that deep, maybe unconscious memory or yearning for that perfect state where everything was
Okay.
just. Total security, total fulfillment.
But the flip side, when that emotional support isn't there,
Then the baby plunges into what he calls an experiential hell, the pain universe. It's that feeling, again, total insecurity, terror, the self just disintegrating.
okay, but hang on. No parent is perfect, right? Don't kids need some frustration to grow?
Yeah.
I'm thinking of Winnicott here.
Absolutely. You have to bring in Winnicott. Optimal frustration and the good enough mother. That's essential. A baby has to learn the mother is separate, that needs aren't met instantly. That's how we develop.
So where's the line? When does normal developmental frustration become damaging, become this pain universe?
It's about duration and intensity relative to the baby's capacity at that stage. Is the frustration brief? Can the mother come back quickly and repair things? Or is the emotional absence prolonged, overwhelming? If it's too much, too often, that's when it tips into trauma. And a lot depends on the mother's own stability.
Right, her internal state. This is where the source brings in Jorma Teke's ideas about self-states to explain the mother's potential instability.
Yes. Teike's work helps understand this. So let's say the mother is generally stable. She operates mainly from her basic self, which ideally is rooted in a healthy, true self. She's predictable, consistent. Her emotional warmth isn't flipping on and off like a switch. That consistency builds basic trust in the PD. That's Erickson's first stage, right? Foundation of everything.
Okay, that's the ideal. But what if the mother's carrying her own baggage? Her own unresolved trauma?
Well, that's where it gets difficult. If her own psyche isn't stable, she can fall into these really volatile, chaotic self-states.
Wow.
Klaavu notes this often gets triggered most intensely with her own kids.
Ah, the instability trap. So the baby gets the physical care, they're fed, they're changed.
Mechanically, yes, but the emotional connection keeps vanishing. One minute, mom is warm and loving. The next, she slips into this chaotic state, maybe withdrawn, maybe hostile, maybe anxious, and that warmth is just gone. The baby feels utterly rejected, abandoned, again and again, back into the pain universe.
And the source says the baby concludes. They are the reason. How does that work? It seems so backwards.
It's a survival mechanism, really. Think about it from the baby's perspective. Their entire world, their survival, depends utterly on that caregiver. They cannot conceive that the caregiver is unreliable or flawed. So the only possible explanation, the only way to make sense of the loving presence disappearing is, it must be me. I did something wrong. I made the good mother go away.
Wow. That's devastating. And that's the root of that deep total shame.
That's it. The absolute core belief, I'm defective, I'm bad, unlovable, worthless, it's all my fault. And it's total shame. It covers their entire being, not, I feel ashamed I broke the vase. It's my existence is shameful.
Okay, intellectually I can grasp that, but it's hard to picture how someone carries that into adulthood and still functions. Does Klaavu give examples?
He does. Very powerful ones. Take the case of the adapting man. Outwardly, super successful, smart, capable, good social skills, but inside, crippling feelings of worthlessness. And in relationships, he kept finding partners who, well, took him for granted, dismissed him.
So unconsciously recreating that original dynamic.
Exactly. His mother, it turned out, had this stable facade at work with friends, but at home, volatile, chaotic. She had her own severe trauma history. So as a tiny baby, this client developed these incredibly sensitive emotional antennae. He had to. He learned to sense her shifts, her chaotic states, and just unconsciously adapt, become whatever she needed him to be in that moment to keep things okay, to survive.
Falling into that victimized self-state you mentioned.
Yeah.
Putting her needs first, always.
Yes, and every single time he adapted, every time he wasn't himself but was playing a role for her, he was emotionally abandoning himself, reinforcing that core unconscious belief, good things aren't for me. If I get something good, it'll be taken away.
Yeah.
His whole adult life was driven by this reflex, this fear of annihilation if he didn't adapt.
God, that's heavy. And the second case, the emotionally abandoned woman, how was her experience different?
It was maybe more subtle on the surface, but just as damaging. She was highly intelligent, educated, but really struggled socially, felt constantly misread, rejected. Her parents seemed nice, kind even, but Klaavu stresses their interactions were mechanical, like they were following an external script of how parents should act, but without genuine, spontaneous feeling behind it.
So the feeling was missing again, even if the outward behavior looked okay.
Precisely. In her case, her mother's own default state, her basic self, was rooted in victimized self-states, probably from her own past. So the mother couldn't really see the client, the baby, as a separate person with her own needs. Instead, she unconsciously projected her own wounded inner child onto the baby and sort of nurtured that projection. The real baby was never really seen, never met.
Just completely emotionally dismissed from day one. What did that lead to for her?
It cemented this core belief that she was totally bad and flawed, that she inherently deserved rejection, even abuse. Consciously, she might say, my parents were fine. But unconsciously, that feeling of worthlessness was so profound that she'd seek out situations in adulthood where she'd be rejected or mistreated because, weirdly, that felt familiar. That felt like home.
This really drives home how unbearable that core wound is, that feeling of worthlessness. Klaavu calls it a psychological abscess, right? Something huge and painful pushed way down.
Yeah, it's often so walled off, so defended against. He notes that sometimes just thinking about it intellectually can trigger physical reactions.
Yeah.
Nausea, panic, feeling hot. The body-mind remembers that original terror and throws up defenses.
Which must make healing incredibly difficult.
Yeah.
And long.
Definitely. It can take years just to get to the point of understanding it intellectually, and then even longer to actually connect with the feeling of it experientially, to touch that original pain safely before any real healing can happen.
And in the meantime, people find ways to cope.
Or,
Try to cope.
right, Klaavu lists the common ones. Throwing yourself into sports, extreme diets, workaholism.
How does something like, say, workaholism connect back to that infant experience?
Well, think about it. If your core feeling is, I'm worthless and I'll inevitably be abandoned, you crave control and validation. Workaholism can provide a sense of purpose, external validation, maybe even a feeling of control over something in your life when your internal world feels chaotic or relationships feel dangerous. It becomes a way to manage the underlying anxiety, the terror of that pain universe. Same with substance use, sometimes even medication.
But the conclusion is, These are just coping mechanisms, right? Painkillers.
Exactly. They might numb the symptom, the immediate pain or anxiety, but they never solve the core problem. They don't heal that original relational wound.
So wrapping this up, we've seen how that very first year, that pre-verbal time, is just critical. The difference between genuine emotional presence and just mechanical care. It sets this fundamental view of the self and these deep, often totally unconscious beliefs about being worthy or flawed. They're not just history. They're actively shaping our lives, our relationships, right now.
Absolutely. Which leads to a final thought, maybe something for you listening to reflect on. If so much of our adult behavior, especially in relationships, can be an unconscious echo of that infant survival strategy that need to adapt to avoid the pain universe, then it's worth asking, what parts of your behavior, particularly in your closest connections, might be subtle echoes of those early needs, or the lack of them? How much is a reflex born out of that old need for survival versus how much is, well, genuinely you choosing freely today?